when you design for the average, you design for nobody. A reasonable amount of people think, oh, MTSS equals an IEP. MTSS equals a 504. MTSS equals a separate track. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets.
I just wanted to start asking about you and your role in education. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what prompted you to go the MTSS route.
You know, the MTSS route was not an intentional choice. It was kind of just a series of events. My dad, growing up, he always told me, he's like, follow your passion, always follow your passion, and it'll open up doors that you didn't know existed. And I would say that is kind of how I landed in MTSS, the realm of MTSS. So I initially studied abroad in Quito, Ecuador. The last semester of my senior year, I went to U of I, so go Illini, and I was in Quito, Ecuador. And I like to say I grossly overstayed my welcome by 10 years. So I went back, I lived life, I did all the things there, and I also began my career there, so teaching at the American School of Quito. And that place has a very special spot in my heart. The kids there are just amazing. The colleagues, the friendships I formed there. It's a great place. But that's where I really started to see just the diversity in learners. And I had the great fortune of, do you happen to know who Lavana Roth is?
No.
So she's amazing. Add her to your list of people to dive into. And she came in and did a professional development series when I was there, right when I was beginning my teaching career. And she mentioned this book called The End of Average. And I just, I'm a book nerd. I like to read, much like my daughter. She's also a book nerd. I've passed that on to her. And I just quickly jotted the book down, The End of Average by Todd Rose. And I read that book, and that forever changed how I viewed education and the systems that surround it. So this book, at the end of the day, and I like to give this example whenever I'm speaking with educators, he gives the example of the US Air Force and fighter jets way back in the day. And at this moment in time, they had your top technology and your top pilots. And when you put your top pilots in our top technology, they literally had disastrous results. Planes were crashing and burning, and they couldn't figure out why. Why, when we take the best talent we have across the nation and pair it with our top technology, we should be having exceptional results, not the opposite. And they brought in a consultant, and the consultant ultimately said, you've designed the cockpit for the average, at this moment in time, male. So average height, average arm length, everything. And essentially, the big takeaway is when you design for the average, you design for nobody. Nobody is a perfect line down the middle, which really is contradictory to how we view average in our society, right? The average is something that we wildly embrace. We really don't question it. We have our average X, Y, and Z. Think about how often we use that term. So reading that book while I was beginning my educational career, that is really what helped me view students as we all have areas of opportunity. We all have areas of strength, and we all have things that we might be quote unquote average on. However, that's where I see MTSS as this vehicle to really design to the edges. So really not designing down the center, because when we design down the center, we create classrooms, schools that really cater to nobody. And how do we ultimately build out and design classrooms that lean into everybody's strengths and weaknesses? And I realize I am stating something that is conceptually and structurally, there's a lot that goes into that, right? I'm saying it like it's very easy, like, oh, just design to the edges. But at the end of the day, when we design for the average, we do design for nobody. And when we look at our NAEP data, when we look at our stalled growth, our achievement that's being impacted as a nation, I would say it's time that we start to rethink how we structure our systems in general. So that's ultimately what led me to MTSS. I had, well, I know many other things, right? But we only have like 45 minutes to talk. So I would say that book was really pivotal. And then Lavana Roth, she is someone who's just continued to be a mentor to me. So, hey, Lavana. But she's somebody who she's very much influenced my career as well. So Todd Rose, The End of Average, and Lavana Roth.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of different things, but I can see how it all contributed to that path. I wrote her name down so that I don't forget. I'll have to look into her. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely.
And that makes sense because with MTSS, I mean, you're trying not to um, give everyone the same thing, but also scaffold, where they need it. And I know like so many of us are familiar with the concept of MTSS and RTI and like that kind of
Yeah.
triangle or pyramid that represents the different supports that students get as they go up. But how would you define MTSS? Like, is there more to it than that?
I think there are a lot of misconceptions when people hear the term MTSS, and it's through nobody's fault of their own. There are just so many, there's a lot of conflicting information. It's positioned differently in many different arenas. I think when most people hear the term MTSS, their mind goes to, and I'm not saying this is accurate, but I see a reasonable amount of people think, oh, MTSS equals an IEP, MTSS equals a 504, MTSS equals a separate track. And at the end of the day, MTSS is our organizing system structure and processes that are anchored in Tier 1. So, and I think that's a shift a lot of people are really coming to discuss. I'm seeing a lot of conversations around this. Just in when I go to conferences, LinkedIn, in general, educators are really talking about MTSS first and foremost is tier 1 and coherence throughout tier 1. And then what we're doing for support, that should be removing barriers, but connected to tier 1. So not having a disconnected initiative that ultimately might be supporting a area where there is a gap for that student or group of students, but is what we're doing right now ultimately giving these students the keys to the kingdom that they need to be successful within tier 1. So that coherence between support and then similarly for enrichment. So is what we're doing for enrichment, is it going deeper within the standards that we're learning within tier 1? Or is it interdisciplinary? That's also amazing. I'm a huge interdisciplinary fan. Or is it something that's wildly disconnected that is interesting and is beneficial, but not really connected to what's happening within tier 1? So
Okay.
when I think of MTSS, I think of it as it's our teams, it's our PLCs, it is our RACI structures, who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, right? I think that is huge, having clarity around what corresponds to who, because when we lack that clarity around roles, accountability, who's consulted and informed within our system structures and processes, it becomes very easy to say, let's put a pin in this. It can very easily turn into a kicking of the can as opposed to let's make a decision and take action. And then, of course, MTSS is leveraging our data. But again, when we're looking at our data, this is where coherence is so important. If children are having wildly different experiences from classroom to classroom, school to school within a district, we might be looking at data, but if it lacks that coherence, we're going to have a hard time understanding trends and patterns if we have different things occurring within different pockets. So first and foremost, alignment followed by coherence, followed by structures, systems, processes, teams, all anchored within tier 1. That was a mouthful, and I hope that made sense.
It it does, and it's really interesting to me because it's like the a bunch of things you said were interesting. I know we can't go like in each direction.
Go where you
Um,
want. Go where you want. I'll follow you. I'll follow where
but
you
it
want to go.
sounds like the like it's very it has to start very structural. So like at the as high far back as you can go and like the structure of the school is where it has to start. And then if that, like you said, if it's not coherent, then like the data almost doesn't mean a whole lot because you don't have a consistent way of,
You have too many variables at play.
yeah.
So when you're making those decisions regarding X, Y, or Z, if there is incoherence running rampant, it's hard to see what the through line is and make actionable decisions that move the needle for student growth, which ultimately impacts student achievement. I had the great fortune. You asked me this question, and I think I dove right dived right into Todd Rose and the end of average. But after I segued out of the classroom, I was at NWEA and I learned a lot about, okay, quality data and also just the strong, strong relationship between growth percentiles, growth cohorts, and ultimately attaining achievement. And when we have those variables, when we have that lack of coherence, it's really hard to find, like I said, that common thread throughout and ultimately make those choices that where we can see what are high impact practices versus what are maybe, I don't want to say low impact, but not as impactful practices within our educational context and settings.
Right. So your decisions are going to be have more impact and make a bigger difference. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
you're comparing apples to apples as opposed to apples to oranges.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. You've shared a specific like diamond model of MTSS, and I had never seen that before. And I just really thought it was great because you're shifting the focus from like MTSS not just being intervention, like academic or behavioral intervention, but the I'll try to describe it if people are just listening. But so with the diamond in the middle is the tier one, and then it goes out, and each end of the diamond is intervention and enrichment. So with that, do you feel like enrichment has like deserves just as much of a place as intervention, or would you still say it's supplemental? Do you
I This is a, I speak only for myself, right? I personally feel extension has just as much importance, carries just as much weight as support, especially when we look at growth and accelerating students to grade level and beyond. That's really where the rubber will meet the road and you're going to see those gains is through, well, one, strong tier one, and then enrichment as well. Of course, supplemental, of course, supports when needed. But enrichment, in my opinion, is just as important. And it's very easy to sweep it under the rug when we approach MTSS as a system that is responsive as opposed to proactive. We find ourselves kind of, I wrote a blog on this, but it's kind of a triage, right? We're constantly responding to problems as they arise. And once we really have a strong tier one structure in place that is coherent, and again, I know I'm saying this like it's just, you can do this from one day to the next. No, this takes a lot of intentional practice. It takes a lot of intentionality behind teams and roles and curriculum assessment, instructional practices. But once that's in place, you'll see that shift moving from reactive to, okay, our first line of defense is solid. We might have to provide support when needed, of course, but you're going to see a lot more room for extension and enrichment as well.
Okay, yeah. Because like you said that if that tier one is if there's differentiation in the tier one and kids are already doing well, that yeah, it's going to be natural that they would go in that enrichment direction more often.
And just an example I can think of, a very, very recent one, I had the great pleasure to work with the American School in Taichung. And the leadership team there is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. We just wrapped up this past week, so they're fresh in my mind. And their focus is on strengthening tier one. So they're an American school in Taiwan. And at the end of the day, every student there is a multilingual learner. So every student should be having that differentiated access to language instruction embedded within their tier one. And that's what they're working to do, right? So they're really like all these supports and differentiations that are needed for their students to be successful, they're embedding them within tier one, not reacting to them. They're a great example of really designing a system with tier one in mind.
Yeah, I think I saw you post about that. Yeah.
Yeah, as I told you, I'm always I
And
have to
that
spread good things and good practices when I see them.
yeah, and that must be nice for then those students like you don't feel like you're being punished for something or like you're lacking something because everyone's getting it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And And my daughter, my son, they were born in Quito, Ecuador. My daughter, until she was about in second grade, she studied in Spanish. So when she came here, she was very much a multilingual learner. And being a multilingual learner is 1,000% an asset. All day, every day. I will say that. How our system sometimes approaches it, I will say it's not always treated that way. And I don't think that's through malice. I just think it's a series of events of how it unfolds. But yes, to your point, right? When you honor that and build it in, it's celebrating it. It's saying, hey, you're a multilingual learner. This is awesome. And here's some vocab. Here's a sentence stem that might be beneficial. But it normalizes that. And it's like you said, you're not getting pulled out and it's not a support that feels like it's a deficit,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. We spoke with it was a couple of years ago now, but Brian Butler, who I think does consulting with Solution Tree, but he wrote a book about treating every student basically like they're a gifted learner, and he had this one phrase that to make gifted education the floor of every classroom, like that's
Oh,
your
I love that.
basic level. Yeah, so it makes me
I
think
love
of, isn't
that.
that a cool phrase? Yeah,
Which it should be, right? And
exactly.
when you mentioned the diamond model and how tier one's at the center, and I'll send this visual to you. But when you think about a jagged learning profile, right? So let's say there's you and me. I'm going to have strengths over here, some areas of opportunity over here. I'm going to have a very jagged profile throughout. And when you kind of put that over the diamond, that's where you see your classroom, right? That should be the floor. And we should expect excellence of all of our students. And we should know that they can achieve and do great things. And if we need to build in an additional layer here and there, absolutely, absolutely. But I do like that gifted should be the floor. And I do have to say, the diamond's amazing, but I cannot take credit for that. It's been out there. It just hasn't gotten the infamy I feel it deserves. So
Yeah. Well, we'll try to get it out there too and share it with more people because yeah, I think it's really important to see both aspects of that. Yeah.
absolutely.
So with like the schedule, because I know we've talked a little bit about that. Um, it's really interesting to me because when you think about changing a school schedule, like and incorporating time,
Hmm.
that really is a tier one change because if all kids are getting it,
A
right?
1,000% it is. And I'm so glad you named that. It is a tier one
Yeah.
structure.
And it could be used, I think, for tier two or three, like if needed. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. It's when you think of win time, it stands for what I need, right? Uh, so at the end of the day, it is really meant to lean into what students need at that moment in time. And this is where I think the diamond is so important because you might need extension and enrichment now. We might need to go deeper versus, okay, if on this particular skill, we might need to revisit it. We might need to provide a double dose of instruction. We might need to revisit a prerequisite skill here just to make sure that's solidified so you can most effectively access and engage with your tier one curriculum. So, yeah, win time at the end of the day is a tier one structure, and it really speaks to time as an infrastructure. And I'm sure I've never stepped into a setting and not heard we don't have enough time. And this is where, when we think about win time, we have to be very intentional with our priorities. And so many, especially in elementary, what I'll hear is, we really want to implement a win time, but band or the band schedule versus the X, Y, and Z schedule. And so I just simply ask people, just tell me what your priorities are. There's always a pathway forward, always, always a pathway forward. And every single time I've worked with the district, that pathway is discovered. I will say mindset is oftentimes a large barrier in education everywhere, everywhere. Um, it's very common for people to be adverse to change. I will say in education, myself included, right? I'm not placing myself on some pedestal. And, we can very easily fall into the mindset of this is how we've always done it. And it's been moderately successful. So trying something very new it can feel edgy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's there's just so many things that people are facing in the classroom, teachers and districts, that it must get very overwhelming. But we've heard that from so many schools that we've worked with. Like, they have been able to kind of rethink things, and time. It just takes effort and trying to get buy-in, honestly. And sometimes it's just a matter of seeing, well, here's how this school did it. When it's working well for them, well, maybe we can do something similar. But yeah, it must be very hard.
It's a challenging conversation to navigate initially. And I've seen a lot of success with it. I really
Good.
have. What I will say is the importance when we think about just time as an infrastructure, win time, and leveraging it effectively is just ensuring that there's coherence. I know I keep saying coherence, 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 but that when we're working with students during win time, that it is connected to tier one. We're not doing something disconnected. Otherwise, we're essentially at the end of the day still stalling growth and widening achievement gaps. So with this time, having it there is the first step, but ensuring that it's coherent and aligned with tier one in both directions, right? For support and enrichment, that's fundamentally important as well.
Okay, so not necessarily introducing like a brand new skill or way of learning.
What I always ask people, especially when we're looking at support, is what we're doing removing a barrier to tier one? If so, it's worth our time. If it is interesting and addressing a potential gap that might exist, but it's not directly connected to what's occurring within tier one, and addressing it now will in no way, shape, or form give them the keys to the kingdom, there's a time and a place. But when we're thinking about what we're doing as far as supports go, it really does need to be removing barriers to tier one. And if it's not, well, then at the end of the day, we're still not addressing the root
Yeah,
cause of
not
what's
really.
occurring and impeding their ability to engage with tier one.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's a good phrase to remember for that. Do you, I mean, I already know the answer to this question, that yes, it's important to have the protected time.
Yes.
But do you think, I guess I'll just ask you, like, how important do you think it can really be done without having like a protected time for this?
For providing supports and enrichment.
Hmm.
So it can be done, but it just comes back to time as an infrastructure. So how are we leveraging and how are we differentiating within tier one? How much time do we have at the end of the day? And this is if we look at, let's say we're looking at a district's data set and we see they have a substantial amount of students that are in the, let's say, 20th to 40th percentile or 40th percentile and below. That would indicate that we have a substantial amount of students that might, right? I would need to look at additional assessments, but that might need additional support with certain prerequisite skills in order to effectively engage in their tier one material. And ultimately, when we don't have a protected time set aside to ensure that we're providing those supports that are needed to effectively engage within tier one, well, that's coming from our classroom time, right? Which is protected tier one time. And if we're not being very strategic with how we're using that time, it can quickly become teaching those skills that are needed to access tier one and then quickly moving through tier one, because teachers, very understandably so, feel great pressure to stay in alignment with their scope and sequence. So that's when I speak with teachers, they're like, well, I want to be staying on this pace. However, when I get there, I realize my students, there's certain skill gaps that I need to address first. So it ultimately becomes this vicious cycle of, okay, I want to be teaching tier one material. However, I need to address this because without this knowledge, without this skill, they're going to have a very difficult time engaging with what we're learning in the classroom. So when we have that protected time, when we look at data, when we give pre-unit assessments, and when we look at the standards that are kind of our power or priority standards, whatever, there's many words people use, but what standards are we leaning into within our upcoming tier one unit? That's where we can ultimately say, okay, let's get a pulse check on where these students are with those prerequisite skills. And before we get to our tier one instruction, a couple to a few weeks ahead of time during our win time, that's where we can really tighten and really strengthen those prerequisite skills that would ultimately provide them the keys to the kingdom that they need to engage with their upcoming material. Time is an infrastructure. Time is a part of when we look at system structures and processes. As much as time is abstract, it's very concrete in the sense that we understand that time is real, but you've literally given time for this. That being said, time will be taken from something else, right? So that's where you have to ask yourself, what are our priorities and our choices, our goals? Is this aligned to our strategic plan? And just make those choices that are in alignment with goals. And if they're not directly aligned to goals and strategies, then that's where a conversation is worth having with the leadership team.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that could differ from school to school and
Absolutely.
yeah, the way it'll look.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No two educational contexts are the same. There are many similarities, but for all the similarities that exist, each district it's kind of its own fingerprint, right? It's unique and it has its own set of challenges, its own set of strengths, and a unique community that surrounds it. And that's neither good nor bad, it just simply is.
Right. Yeah. So they individually have to ask those questions to make those choices. Yeah. And with win time, like we've seen at the elementary school level, it looks different, right? Because sometimes that is more one classroom and maybe they'll have stations and that's how they're able to keep it structured. And then in middle and high school, it tends to be more of like a standalone period. And like you've said, it's gives them that time and they're not getting pulled out of, core instruction. They're able to access that all at the same time.
Exactly. You hit the nail right on the head.
Good. So we've kind of talked about already like what makes a time like win time effective versus non-effective. So you talked about coherence and is it really helping them like break down the barriers to tier one? Is it going to be hindering? That can be kind of how people decide. Is there anything else that you've seen that can make it effective or
Yes.
kind of break it? Break it
We'll go asset based.
down.
So, if and when possible, and this is if it's logistically feasible for the school, if they're willing to make this commitment, unifying win time across the grade level. So, I'll give the example of fifth grade. Actually, no, I'll give the example of seventh grade. We'll go middle school. We'll go to the third period, fifth period, fill in the blank period, except first period. Don't ever do first period. I'm very, just kids don't always, if they're late to school, don't do first period.
Yeah.
Any period aside from first. Unify win time across the grade level. And what you have the opportunity to do then is say, okay, we have these students with similar skills, similar needs, similar areas where we can go deeper. You can strategically group students you can pick the time frame, the interval. You could do every 2 weeks. That would be a lot. I've seen people do unit by unit. I've seen people do on a quarter basis. But strategically group the students by their similar needs or shared skills And then you have one educator working with a group of students with similar needs. So you don't have three different stations with three different needs. You are saying we're all similar with what we need to do, what we need to accomplish, with what we need to tackle. And it really is less of a cognitive overload for that educator. So they're not trying to manage three different groupings. They have, because when you have three different groupings in a classroom, essentially, you're rotating. You're giving small group instruction, then this group might be doing something computer-based, this group might be doing something student-led, and the teacher's rotating throughout. Versus when you have a teacher with a group of students with shared needs, then you've essentially tripled the instructional time they're getting. It's much more targeted, much more focused. And, I was a teacher. It's very, very, very easy if you were to give me a classroom of students during wind time, and there's 5 different groupings, 3 to 5 different groupings, it's very easy and understandable for that to devolve into study hall. It just, and so that's where I guess I said I was going to keep it asset based, and I said it, but when it's important to strategically group. So if you can unify win time across the grade level, it allows for that flexible grouping that's strategic, and we're not placing a burden and an extreme cognitive load on an educator who is already doing so much. I am a teacher at heart. I am a huge advocate of teachers whenever I go into these, and I can send you some names that people are like, oh God, you're always advocating for the teachers. I am because they're boots on the ground. They're the ones who are executing what is being envisioned. And we always have to have them and the students front and center and really ask ourselves, okay, theoretically, is this beautiful and would we like to see it? But what does this look like? If I'm the one who has to operationalize this, is this feasible? Is this sustainable? And when we unify win time, when we strategically group, that's much more sustainable than carving out this time, but giving a teacher multiple needs within a setting. It will sooner or later, even with your most incredible educator, devolve into study hall. So strategic grouping, that is, I can't unify by grade level, group strategically.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. And that really, it seems like you said, otherwise it's too much for one person to try to manage. Like
It's
you have to do 3 different lesson plans for this extra time. Like, yeah.
We are mere mortals.
Yeah.
I am a mere mortal. That's a lot on top of. So
Yeah.
yes, I always have that front and center when I'm thinking about, all right, what are we planning? And then what does this look like? What are we asking of the individuals who will ultimately execute upon this plan?
Right. And
Students, right?
yeah.
What is their experience going to be?
Yeah, that's definitely, I'm sure they appreciate that. And what you said too about that it's like tripling the instruction time for that student. I don't know if I've ever thought about it like that way, because we think about that, well, there in some ways, even though you might be losing a few minutes from certain classes to like create a win time, the kids that really need it, it's like they're gaining time. But yeah, the fact that the instruction is going to be so concentrated.
Exactly. And not divided in 3 groupings, right?
Right. That's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like in a day-to-day setting, and this doesn't have to be like perfect world, but
Okay. Because
what
we live in the real world.
exactly? It's nice to talk about the perfect world, but
Our edutopia. I wish I coined that term, by the way.
I
It's such a,
know so brilliant.
so brilliant.
Yeah, George Lucas, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Seems like
So, yeah.
it.
So in a day-to-day setting, like what could effective MTSS look like in a school?
For me, a system that honors learner variability, that allows students to shine because we all have areas where we shine, and normalizes that. And then also normalizes that we all have areas of support. Currently, I feel not all students are receiving that message. The way MTSS is currently structured, it's some students need support. And for those students who are always receiving support, that sends a message. And then for students who might feel that they need support but aren't receiving it, that sends a message as well. So really normalizing that we all have areas where we shine, we all have areas where we need support, and there's a system that honors that learner variability. And I know I've said this 1,000 times, anchored in tier one, coherent. Again, I say that as if it's something that can just be done overnight. It requires a lot of intentionality. It requires strong leadership. However, it absolutely, absolutely can be done. It absolutely can be achieved. It's just simply naming it, naming that this is our priority. And then are the decisions we're making in alignment or not in alignment with that priority?
So you can kind of have a scale to see how you're doing once you set your priorities. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have a whole thing where you can I created a whole thing where you can go in and really look at where are we coherent, where can we maybe tighten the bolts a little.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. These are all things that have solutions because up until now, I something I've heard a lot of educators say is when we talk about MTSS, we talk about the students and needing to quote unquote, I don't fix the students. And it really is how do we build a system that supports our students, right? So when I see MTSS, my focus is if we're not seeing the results we want, I'm not looking at the children, I'm looking at the system around it. And that's where we start.
That's a really good mindset shift, I think, because sometimes it is like, oh, these are the tier three students. Like they were right. They're the
But
problem.
so there's this quote, and I'm drawing a blank on who said it right now. I'd have to look it up. But it's every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And that really resonated with me. Maybe because I'm a systems thinker, right? So there's a reason it resonates with me. But truly, every system, if we're not seeing the results we want, let's look at the system. And not in a punitive way, right? But okay, where can where can we do things differently? Educators in general are I've not met one educator who doesn't have the biggest heart and who isn't there for the absolute most altruistic reasons. What I will say is our mindsets, I think, are the foundation for everything we do. So really believing that all students can achieve at high levels, not just some students. I would say thought precedes action. And so, really having that mindset that every child, every student is capable of achieving at high levels and doing great things. And once we believe that, then we more easily and more willingly build the system to support that. If that isn't an intrinsic belief in someone's core, actions will follow. And so I would say almost everyone believes. But it can be easy to step into that mindset of, oh, I'd say belief first and foremost.
I think that's really good advice. And I know you've said you've seen this work well, and do you have any success stories that you'd like to share? And this could be like a school, an educator, a student, but any time that you'd like to share that you've seen this work well.
Yeah, I've seen this work very well. And I'll protect names, the district, and the name of the student. But a student I'll give a very granular example, at the 21st percentile for reading. And when provided with the proper structures and supports, that was in alignment to kind of granting the keys to the kingdom for tier one. Within a year's time, they went from the 21st percentile to the 64th. So when there is coherence, when the systems and structures are in place, you absolutely see growth, which ultimately impacts achievement. And this child went from saying, I'm not a good reader and I don't think I'll ever be a good reader, to I'm a really good reader and I'm really smart. And guess what? They're also doing really great at math now because it's not a reading test first and foremost. Those
Right.
right? So it when we do MTSS well, right? And when we build the systems and structures there, when we have coherence, when we carve out that time, you'll absolutely see movement and growth.
It's such a logical system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really, I mean, that's the goal at the end of the day is for kids to feel like they are able to do things well and to succeed in life. Yeah.
And that's why I think extension and enrichment are so important because if we don't name it, we don't always, it can fall to the back burner. But everybody, and I truly mean this, and every student I ever had, I always told them, and I meant it, you are exceptional and you are going to do great things. And I've had a large handful of students reach out years after the fact and say, hey, when you said that to me, that was pivotal, especially students that had struggled. Because I know what it feels like to be a struggling student and to be told, there's a litany of things and life is going to be hard for you. And if you don't get your act together and X, Y, and Z. And so whenever I had a student that I knew was struggling, and although I'm not present in every conversation, somewhere along the lines received that messaging several times, I thought it was important to give them hope and say, you're exceptional and you are going to do great things. And it's those students that have reached out to me years later and said, hey, you changed how I saw myself. So I guess this is where it does come back to belief. A child just knowing someone believes in them goes a long way, a very, very long way, not just in their self-esteem, but in their willingness to try. Because if they're receiving the message that they're probably not going to succeed, they're most likely not going to make the effort. Why would they? Right?
So you're kind of raising the bar for them. Yeah.
And just even saying, I see how exceptional you are and you will do great things. And I'm a big believer in sometimes we plant seeds and we don't always see what grows from them.
Yeah, absolutely.
In education, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of planting of seeds, and you might not ever know what comes from that. But always plant hope, plant belief. And that's what I think as educators, what we're here for. Truly, as cliche as this sounds, I think at the end of the day, it's education makes the world a better place. It provides opportunity. It has the potential to reshape our world in such a powerful way. And really just telling a student, I believe in you and I see that you're going to do great things, it'll change their life. They might not tell you that, but it'll change their life somewhere along the lines. And so providing that system and that structure that allows them to have those experiences, to experience those successes, it's fundamentally important.
So if there's a school who is considering implementing MTSS,
Yeah.
or one piece of advice that you would give them to start?
I would say to begin with, really looking first and foremost at whether they're aligned or they are coherent. And aligned is having the tools, coherence is the practices that support the tools, where they are on that continuum, and really working towards, I know I keep saying this, how we can build a system and structure that upholds coherence, and then building our supports, extensions, enrichments around that. And we talked a lot about academics, but behavioral, attendance. How are we, if we are having behavioral issues in class, how are we getting to the root cause of that? So a district I'm working with is creating what they're calling the care center. And this center is ultimately for any students that might have otherwise received a 10-day or fill in the blank X day amount of out of school suspension. They're really going to intentionally have social workers on hand, counselors, teachers that work with them and keep them connected to their academics so they don't fall behind, but they also keep them connected to conflict resolution, social emotional learning, executive functioning skills. So when they re-enter their classroom again, they haven't gone on, well, let's be real. When kids are sent away for 10 days, a lot of them refer to that as vacation. So at the end of the day, keeps them connected and works on the behavioral gaps that might need tightening as well. So I would say coherence throughout, truly coherence throughout. Alignment, coherence. Where are we? Do we have the tools? And if we don't even have a unified curriculum, well, then we need to first and foremost make sure that we're aligned before we build out the practices that uphold coherence. And then that's where we layer on our behavioral, that's where we layer on our attendance, et cetera. It's a process. It's a process. Absolutely doable. But you can't put the cart before, what is that? The cart before the horse. There is a continuum to how you would tackle this.
Okay, so it's almost like a pulse check first, like where are we at right now?
Where do
Yeah.
we, much like students in their zone of proximal development, and where do we meet them instructionally? Similarly, when it comes to really approaching MTSS and building out our system, our structures and our processes that support MTSS, we need to see where we are and then what we're doing well, where we might need to tighten some bolts, and then we continue to implement through there.